The Hellraiser franchise is based upon the original novella by Clive Barker, The Hellbound Heart. Overall, it's been a very mixed franchise, to put it lightly. While the first two movies are excellent, and the third isn't too bad, 4 and onward tends to decline in quality or are such a mess of storytelling that they are almost unwatchable. While longtime fans of the series will tell you that not every sequel after 4 is terrible, it cannot be denied that the direct-to-video history of Hellraiser has done its damage to the brand. While the lead Cenobite, Pinhead, is still remembered as a popular movie monster, his portrayal tends to range from very creepy and intimidating monster man to generic slasher villain. One of the things that helps set the franchise apart is the fact that it plays off of human desires and the darker parts of the human psyche. While not every sequel has done this, primarily because many of those sequels weren't meant to be Hellraiser movies to begin with, when they do utilize the aspects of human desire and the darker parts of our nature as a means to progress the story, it does make for a very interesting type of horror film that is unique unto itself. Today, we're looking at Hellraiser 2022. Let's find out if it's gonna suck. Hello, and welcome to my den. It's time to talk about a horror movie. Feels like it's been forever. Man, I don't think I've reviewed anything since Crips, like last year. That's insane. How have I not done a horror movie until now? Well, whatever. We're looking at a brand new horror movie, something I don't normally do, but I figured, what the hell, Razor 2022. Nice. Anyhow, this is the brand new Hellraiser. It was originally kind of said to be a reboot, but it's obviously not a reboot, though it does change a lot of lore. Sort of. It's a complicated movie, so let's get into it. Story begins with a cold open, where a mysterious man essentially gives someone a package. The package happens to have the puzzle box. Puzzle box finds its way into the hands of a rich guy named Voight, and at a fancy sex party, one of the guests is basically introduced to Mr. Voight, is drawn to the box, solves it, cuts his hand, and is immediately taken away while Voight makes a comment about Leviathan. So we're already beginning at a position where it really helps to have at least some background knowledge on Hellraiser, otherwise you might be a little bit lost. We then jump ahead 6 years to an awkward sex scene. We'll get to that in the aesthetics section, but yeah, there's some choices here. We are introduced to essentially our main cast of, for lack of a better word, slasher victims. Yeah, this one's kind of a slasher, which really separates it from your standard Hellraiser setup. In the process, our main character is Riley. She and her brother argue a bit, and Riley goes off with her boyfriend, who convinces her to join him on a heist to steal a thing. He's pretty vague about it. Well, it turns out that thing they're going to steal is the puzzle box, because it has to be, otherwise this movie wouldn't happen. Through another argument with her brother, Riley ends up running off and kind of messing around with the puzzle box while high. Her brother decides to pick her up, because Riley is an addict, and I'm going to say it right now, if you have a close friend or relative who's an addict and they have the potential of running away, harming themselves, or worse yet, harming others, you tend to chase after them. And that's exactly what he does, to his own detriment. Unfortunately, when the puzzle box gets to its next level, he gets cut, and while trying to take care of his wound, disappears. This sets Riley on a whole mystery hunt to figure out what this box is, who does it belong to, why did her brother disappear. In this process, they end up learning about Mr. Voight and how he was into some weird stuff, and this box is part of that. And she decides to go to Voight's mansion to figure out what's actually going on, while her boyfriend prevents her from going there because he thinks it's too dangerous and the box should just be thrown away. Kind of a normal reaction, to be honest. I mean, if you think about it, if you have this weird box and multiple people have disappeared that have been connected to it, maybe toss it in the ocean and pretend you've never seen it. But then we wouldn't have a movie. At the mansion, Riley starts discovering some lore about the box. It has different forms. There's different things you can request, wishes you can basically make after sacrifices are made, which is very different than how the puzzle box works in previous movies. And of course, like idiots, all her roommates and stuff and her boyfriend decide to go and check up on her at the mansion because we need a body count. This leads to one of the dumbest moments in the entire movie where one of the characters decides to wander off on their own, always a good idea, and ends up getting stabbed and becomes one of the sacrifices, where we finally really get to see the Cenobites a little closely as they tortured this person as they've been made a sacrifice to this grand wish from Leviathan. The Cenobites then stalk our main characters and they hide inside the mansion, and this eventually leads to our big climactic finale where we learn what happened to Voight. We learn more about the wish, the sacrifices, and an okay finale. I have mixed feelings on it, but it's not terrible. The story itself is so-so, but the weird changes to lore, as I understand the puzzle box, it's more or less like a summons, or it opens the doorway between dimensions. It's not really built around wishes. This whole built around wishes thing is kind of weird, but it is established that there are multiple puzzle boxes, at least depending which movie you're watching. So this could be a puzzle box that was designed around that wish system. That's for someone who's a hardcore Hellraiser, like, super nerd to be able to tell me the answer on that one. And if you are that super nerd, let me know in the comments, because as far as I can tell, this just seems like it's a different box that allows for wishes as opposed to the main box, which as far as I know doesn't. Aesthetically, this movie is mixed. I'm going to bring up the music first because I have to. They play some of the classic music. Thank you. If you're doing something that's either a sequel or kind of a reboot or a rebuquel, thank you for using the classic music. Especially in that third act, it really adds a lot more to the movie. And overall, the sound design is pretty decently done, and I genuinely like it. Especially how it helps build tension in certain scenes. Visually, let's talk about the bad first. Blood looks like water. I don't know if this is CG blood that just wasn't rendered properly. I don't know if they just like had a bottle of like red Kool-Aid and just poured it in someone's hand. I don't know. The blood looks mostly terrible, and it doesn't feel like fake blood is all that hard to acquire, so there's no excuse for this. I hate how bad the blood looks in this movie. It is terrible, especially in a movie where the blood and viscera is really kind of part of the whole thing. It is part of the horror, especially the body horror aspects of the Hellraiser franchise. You take a look at this blood, and then you go back to the original movie and see how they did Frank, and you can clearly see a key difference between the two. In addition to that, the camera work in certain scenes is weird. The sex scenes are basically terrible. Not only is it two people you really don't want to see together in bed, but you're adding the fact that it's shot really weird. And I don't know if that was to try to keep it, within the R rating range. I don't know if that was the director's style. I don't know. But honestly, we'd have been better off without the sex scenes and their weird way of being shot, because they don't add a lot to the movie, other than, oh, Riley and Trevor are a couple. We could have figured that out anyways. And look, I understand that I'm an old school horror kind of person, and I do enjoy the occasional horror sex scene or shower scene or whatever. You gotta shoot them right, and they have to be done in a way that works for the movie, and neither of those happened here. Finally, the way the Cenobites are shot doesn't work. And this is hard to explain unless you've seen the other Hellraiser movies. But essentially, the way that the Cenobites were always shot in the original movies was to make them seem larger than everyone. Each Cenobite felt like it was towering over the normal humans. In addition to that, the lighting and the way things were framed usually gave the Cenobites a very intimidating presence. Like, just being around them is enough to make you just die from fear. And while not every Hellraiser movie did this properly, I would hope that in a reboot thing, especially when you have a whole new set of actors as the Cenobites and new designs for said Cenobites, you would shoot them in a way that makes them feel intimidating. Because, while we haven't gotten to this yet, I love the new look for the Cenobites, but they're not intimidating. And I know that sounds contradictory. How can you have this weird, skin stretched over bone and the weird combination, feeling like the clothing is part of the skin and the weird facial stuff and not be intimidated? I don't know. It's how they're shot. It's how they're presented. Something about them doesn't feel like they could kill you at any moment just because the thought occurred to them. The chaotic evil nature of the Cenobites, and especially in those early movies, in that I could rip your lungs out just because the thought occurred to me. And that knowing that they could do that makes them intimidating and terrifying. There's a lot of moments there, especially with Kirsty in the first two movies and what have you, where she's very close to them and you can see the fear in her face. You can see the worry that you as an audience member would have, knowing that they could do terrible things to her and no one could stop them. The Cenobites aren't running on a Jason Voorhees invincible monster man kind of thing. They're not Freddy Krueger in someone's dreams being able to just do whatever he wants with no limit. They are these otherworldly beings who don't adhere to the limitations of physics on Earth. There's an intimidating presence to them that makes them scary regardless of what they look like. And for some reason, they just weren't shot right. There's even a slapstick moment with one of them, and I'm like, why did you do that? You're reducing the intimidation factor of these monsters. And I think part of this also comes down to the writing, because there's definitely a difference between, your suffering will be legendary even in hell, versus some of the lines in here. And there are a few callback lines to the movies, and I do appreciate that. And the voice for Pinhead, or the Hell Priest, whatever you want to call the character, was really, really good and intimidating. But the way it was shot just felt like this slim-bodied BDSM person following our early 20s, cannon fodder group. Now let's talk about the positives. In terms of visuals, the fact that when the world shifts between our world and the world of the labyrinth, and the CG used for that and the little slight uncanny look to it is great, because it makes it feel like it's an alien dimension kind of place. It feels different than just Earth. And as much as I love the practical effects of the original, adding some of that CG effect to make the labyrinth world look drastically different than our world is nice. In addition to that, the CG used to augment the Cenobites and the Cenobites as a whole were really well done. I love these redesigns. I like the weird trying to achieve that androgyny of the original story, and also making them look like their bodies were sewn together with fabric and flesh is wonderful. I love the way their faces look, the paleness, everything is just, chef's kiss. It's wonderful. And as a person who wanted to do special effects as a child, and then stopped once The Matrix came out and I realized everything was just going to become CG, I appreciate where you can tell there's some makeup effects being used here and some costume effects being used here, and then mixing in that CG to giving that otherworldly feel, and that's excellent. It's perfect. Finally, I'll give a few points to the mansion. While the mansion feels like generic horror mansion, there's little aspects of adding in kind of designs from the puzzle box into the building. I really did appreciate that. It's a trope from previous movies, sure, but I liked how it was executed, and it was really cool. In addition to that, I like the way they handled Voight in terms of his look when you see him later on in the movie and what the Cenobites have done to him. As for our characters, what characters? Yeah, this is one of the weaknesses of the movie. It unfortunately falls under that category of a lot of modern horror, where our protagonist and his or her friends are more or less just there to be body count and not really there to have deep personalities. That being said, I can say a little bit about a few of the characters. Riley obviously is our main character. She is a burnout. She's going through the 12-step process, but clearly being pretty terrible at it, considering she still uses. And I believe they make comment about her being only in 12-step for about 6 months, and she's in a relationship, which really you shouldn't do. I'm not here to preach or anything, but that's kind of how that works. She does have a lot of the behaviors of an addict, and as someone who has had family members, friends, loved ones in this category, seeing someone behave like that and seeing the way she does things and how her brother is trying to be there for her and arguing and fighting, but still, I really care about you and I want you to be healthy. I love that. It was very authentic to addiction. In fact, if anything, I felt like the addiction angle was something that really could have been interesting with the puzzle box, and we never really explore that. And that's massively unfortunate for her character, because it feels like that would be a big draw from the puzzle box. Sensation is supposed to be one of the gifts. What is an addict chasing? They're chasing sensation. They want to feel different. They want to feel better. They want to let go of this world and be someone else, even if just for a moment. And that doesn't really come up as a temptation, and that feels like a waste. Again, another problem with the writing. Also, while I understand why Riley's brother and Riley's boyfriend would both be trying to protect her and be after her, there's nothing that establishes why the other characters remotely care. Riley's brother's boyfriend, whose name I don't remember because these characters are incredibly forgettable, has no reason to chase after Riley, especially after his boyfriend died, unless he grew close to Riley over the time that they were dating. Sure, I guess I can kind of slide that in, but a lot of the other characters don't even feel like they even know her, but they're there to pick her up from the mansion anyways, because we need a body count. Because the story needs to happen. Instead of having a more logical reason why all these people know each other or like each other, maybe they could have established that with a few lines of dialogue saying, hey, we were best friends in high school and we don't want to see you get hurt. Or the reason we're all living together is because we're trying to help you stay on the straight and narrow. We're here to help out your brother, blah, blah, blah. You could have thrown in some lines like that would give me reason why these people actually care. As far as I'm concerned, this is your troublemaker roommate, and she's going off to get killed. Fine, we'll get someone else in there to pay her share, when she actually paid it, by the way. And you don't really get that attitude about her. They're just like, oh, like, yeah, cool, we'll go rescue her. Like I said, these characters don't really have much in terms of personality. In fact, it's even sad when one of the characters amongst them, wanders off in the mansion and becomes a sacrifice. And I'm like, one, why are you so stupid? And then you see a little bit of that character's torture and you're like, oh, that's just unfair. Beyond those characters, we do have Mr. Voight. He's fine. He feels like your traditional Hellraiser antagonist type character. And I know it's weird to say that when the Cenobites are considered by many to be the antagonists. Most of the time they're not. They're kind of more of a function of the antagonist or a result of the antagonist's behavior. But that being said, he's, creepy. He has his own little plan, his manipulation of people, his inevitable fate. It's really interesting and cool, and I think we could have gained a lot more if Voight had been more of the story from the get-go, rather than just dumping him into third act and going, oh, by the way, he's all weird and messed up from his experiments with the box, and he has his own evil plan. He's not a terrible character, and he's well acted, and I like how he was handled. I just wish there was more of him, because I think he was one of the more interesting aspects of the story. Finally, the Cenobites. The Cenobites don't have personalities, per se, and as I said earlier, they're not very intimidating, but I will say this, that I like the way that each one seems to move in their own kind of way, and the fact that you see that pain that they're in while they move and act, and I like that, because technically the Cenobites, as I understand it, are supposed to be in constant pain. They just embrace it. And they transcend it in a way. And I like seeing that, where the body clearly looks like some of the times it's not moving the way they would want it to move, or it's a little bit weird and awkward, and that works. And I think a lot of the physical acting on the side of the Cenobites was really well done. The writing and shooting of them may have let them down a bit, but the way they moved and acted and that physical aspect was really well done. Overall, I have mixed feelings of this movie, for a lot of reasons. One, the gore levels are really low. And while there are some sequels that really play down the gore, likely due to budget issues or newbie directors, or their movies weren't originally meant to be a Hellraiser movie, got turned into one. That happened multiple times, by the way. That's bizarre. But the point is, that low gore level, and one of the things I come to for the Hellraiser series is I really love gore effects. Like I said, as a kid, I wanted to do special effects stuff. And when I see gore effects, I'm like, how did they do that? What kind of latex are they using? What did they put on the skin? How did you create this skinless look? How did you prop someone up in a way where they're being like pulled in different directions and what have you? Or is that a mannequin? And if that's a mannequin, that's an amazingly well done mannequin. That kind of stuff I love. And so I'm not really getting that in this movie. The gore is really low. If you're someone who's like, oh, I'm squeamish, I'm not sure if I want to watch Hellraiser, this is probably one of the tamest in terms of the gore. You still see some reaction from the people, and there's a couple moments of body horror, but for the most part, this is really tame by Hellraiser standards. Hell, by a lot of slasher standards. In addition to that, the writing isn't great on multiple levels. Like I said, we don't know why any of Riley's friends are really following her around. And I think the only reason I even liked these characters is because this takes place in Massachusetts, and they kind of reminded me of like Orange Line White Trash. And I do appreciate that. No one had a Boston accent. There was no usage of Boston as a city. You can clearly tell this was shot probably in the middle of Central Europe. Heck, the beginning scene takes place in Serbia. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole movie was shot in Serbia. The writing in and of itself, despite the usage of some of the classic lines with the Cenobites, we don't really have anything that feels really intimidating in their dialogue, which is unfortunate because you have these cool looking Cenobites and they have awesome voices. The other issue is the movie is long, way too long. I'm fine with them having some establishing shots here and there. I'm fine with expository dialogue and stuff, but it really feels like a chunk of this movie can be trimmed out. Hell, you could probably solve a lot of the issues of this movie if you just made the kids urban explorers who go to this abandoned mansion, stumble across the puzzle box, and all hell, pun intended, breaks loose. The way it was handled just felt like it kind of dragged a little bit in the beginning, and the mystery stuff was nice, but it wasn't really handled well. It's a little bit of a clumsiness, and again, that's a problem with the writing. And I know it sounds like I'm ripping on this movie a lot, but the funny part is I kind of enjoyed it. It's not perfect, and it doesn't compete with the first two Hellraisers at all. And I could even argue there's some of the other sequels that surpass this movie. Comparatively to a lot of Hellraiser movies, it's a lot better than them. The acting is better than it is in most movies. The coherence of the story is better than it is in a lot of those movies. While you lack in the gore department and the special effects are kind of hit and miss, you do have some cool visuals. You do have some interesting concepts. So if you have seen the classics, give this a watch. Think of it as kind of a middle of the pack sequel. If you haven't seen Hellraiser before, I still recommend the original. It's a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, but once the movie starts, just boom, it starts. And followed up with part 2 because it continues the story of Kirsty. But if you don't want to go back and watch the originals, maybe you're a little squeamish, maybe seeing people with no skin kind of freaks you out, this one will be at least a little bit easier in that department to digest. And if you have a friend or a loved one who is curious about the Hellraiser franchise, but doesn't know if they want to get into some of the more graphic stuff, this would be a good place for them to start. But I think having some previous knowledge does help in a lot of ways. Bottom line, it's a recommendation. Better than some, worse than others. Overall, not too shabby. Thank you for watching. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, and I kind of enjoy doing it. I might have to do more horror movie reviews, especially in this format, instead of using video game footage like I used to. Anyhow, thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you at the tavern.